This is Thomas Felder, and we are on day 8 of our 31 days of transformation Bible study for Daniel and the Revelation. We are on day 8 of our 31 days of transformation Bible study. We are covering Daniel and the Revelation. We are on Daniel chapter 8. It is day 8. And today's topic is the goat that would be God. The goat that would be God. Let's pray. Dear Father in heaven, we thank you for your grace and your mercy and your kindness towards us. We are so thankful that you have given us your word to help us understand prophecies, to help us understand you, to help us understand last day events, so we need not be afraid when we turn on the news, because you are still in control. Let your spirit speak through this call. Amen, amen, and amen again. Well, let's go ahead and jump right into Daniel 8. There is so much that needs to be covered, so much. We're going to start by reading as usual. If you have your Bible, take it out. If you have a pen and paper, get it handy so you can take notes as we go through it. We're in Daniel chapter 8. Here we go. It says, in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at first. And I saw in a vision, and it came to pass, when I saw that I was at Shushan in the palace, which was in the province of Elam, I saw in a vision, and I was by the river Ulai. So Daniel is really giving you here exactly where he is. Elam is what you now call Iran. Shushan is now called Susa, which is a major city in Iran. Also by the river Ulai, which is now called Kirka. So Daniel is giving you exactly where he is to validate what he is about to tell you. Daniel receives this vision, the vision that he starts now in Daniel chapter 8, verses 1 and 2. He receives this vision 12 years before the fall of Babylon. Since Babylon was about to be overthrown, the vision of this chapter begins with Media Persia. This chapter is also a repeat of chapter 7, with more emphasis on the judgment scene. It is a repeat of Daniel 7. Daniel 7 talks about the kingdoms as they would be destroyed, who would come next. So we find here a rundown of the kingdoms, but instead of starting with Babylon, he starts with Media Persia. And the reason he starts with Media Persia, because Babylon is just about done. It's about to be a wrap. And he's going to talk about some animals that represent the sanctuary service. In Daniel chapter 7, there were 4 beasts, and those 4 beasts were shown the nations that will rule the world and what they would do to the world. But this vision in Daniel chapter 8 is different. It shows what the nations who are ruling will do to God's people and his truth. We know this because the animals and symbols in the new vision are all clean animals that were used in the sanctuary service. Rams and goats were certainly a key part of the sanctuary service. All right, let's jump into Daniel 3. Daniel chapter 8, verse 3. It says, then I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram, which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other. The higher came up last. Verse 4. I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast might stand before him, neither was there any that could be delivered out of his hand, and he did according to his will and became great. When we get to verses 3 and 4, Daniel identifies Media Persia. And he's saying that it's pushing westward, northward, and southward. Why is it only pushing in those three directions? Because A, it was already in the east. Media Persia was already east of Jerusalem. Secondly, when it went west, north, and south, it's talking about the three nations that it had to destroy in order to become the new superpower. To the south, it had Egypt. To the north, it had Babylon. And to the west, it had Lydia. These are the same three nations that we referenced when we talked about Daniel chapter 7. In verse 20, it identifies this ram as Media Persia. So when we get to Daniel 8:20, so you know that I'm not guessing, the angel tells you that the ram represented Media Persia. The two horns represent two parts of the empire with the Persians. The younger of the two nations, meaning Persia, became the dominant over the Medes. We also talked about that when we were in Daniel chapter 7, verse 5. Let's pick up at verse 5 of Daniel 8. And as I was considering, behold, a he-goat came from the west on the face of the a he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth and touched not the ground, and the he-goat had a notable horn between his eyes. And he came to the ram that had two horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him in the fury of his power. The speed which the goat moved across the earth rightly depicts how quickly the Grecian Empire conquered under the leadership of Alexander the Great. Just as verse 20 tells us the ram represents Media Persia, verse 21, Daniel 8:21 tells us exactly what the goat represents, Greece. The same kingdom as the belly and thighs of the bronze image in Daniel 2 and the leopard in Daniel 7. Scripture keeps taking time to confirm itself for you. So you don't think that some crazy person wrote these prophecies and just wanted to talk to you about animals. In 331 BC, on the plains of Arbela, Alexander the Great, with only 40,000 men, faced Darius III Commodus, whose army numbered 1 million strong. That is larger than the current army of the United States. Instituting a new type of warfare, Alexander overthrew him and became a master of the then known world. Good stuff, man. Let's go to verse 7. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with cholera, that's anger, against him. And he smote the ram, and he brake his two horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him. But he cast him down to the ground and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Therefore, the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, for it came of 4 notable ones towards the 4 winds of heaven. You know what's interesting is the way the Bible uses animals to describe nations. Like it describes Babylon as a lion with wings, and we find in the artifacts of Babylon lions with wings. It described Media Persia as the bear, And we do that today. We describe Russia as a bear because it's a big lumbering country that moves slow. Alexander the Great often referred to his kingdom as a goat. Matter of fact, a lot of people who are in Greek organizations, fraternities and such, and other Masonic groups, there's a term that they use called riding the goat. That term came from the Greek Empire when it was not unusual for part of their secret services or initiation services that people will literally ride the goat. It's amazing the things that God brings to our attention that we make fun of and we embrace. Many times in sports, people want to be the GOAT. The GOAT is what they want to be. They call it the greatest of all times. If they only knew what the GOAT represented in Greek society. I also hear people say they want to be the beast. I'm a beast. You know, he's the beast. He's so good at this. When you read the Bible, the beast is not a good thing. Don't refer to yourself as a beast. I want to talk to you about this goat a little bit more in a few minutes, but let's talk about Daniel 8, 5 through 8. Verses 21 and 22 identify the goat as Greece. The notable horn between his eyes were Alexander the Great, who came from the west and defeated the armies of Persia. Alexander died without an ear at the height of his power. His generals fought each other until there were only 4 left, represented by the 4 horns. The 2 animals used to represent Media, Persia, and Greece are not wild animals, but like I told you, they are clean animals. In Leviticus chapter 11 of the Bible makes a distinction between clean animals and unclean animals. The next power to come into view is represented by a horn. The focus of this vision is how the power affects God's sanctuary, his people, and his work of saving souls from sin. We're at Daniel 8, verse 9 now. Daniel 8, verse 9. And it says, and out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceedingly great towards the south and towards the east and towards the pleasant land. Well, when it says towards one of them, and out of one of them, it's talking about out of one of the winds, out of the winds. As we read previously, he talked about that there were 4 winds. So out of one of the directions of those 4 generals that ruled the empire of Greece, out of one of them comes this little horn power. So what were the 4 generals that took over after Alexander the Great? So Alexander the Great and his men conquered the world in 7 years, and his soldiers returned home from India undefeated. He was 32 years of age, and he had conquered every country in his path. At the height of his strength and power, while celebrating his victories in the city of Babylon, Alexander succumbed to drunkenness and malaria. Summoning his 4 leading generals before he died, Alexander told them that he was leaving his empire to the strongest of them. And at this time, the phrase towards the 4 winds of heaven was played out in history. Each of Alexander's 4 leading generals received a portion of the Greek Empire. Seleucus became the ruler of Syria in the east. Lysimachus became the ruler of Asia Minor in the north. Cassander ruled over Macedonia in the west. And Ptolemy ruled over Egypt to the south. Eventually, Cassander, who ruled over Macedonia in the west, his kingdom became what you now know as Rome. Rome was an outgrowth of Greece, and specifically Cassander's kingdom that was in the west. So let's pick up at verse 10. And it says, and it waxed great even to the host of heaven. I'll pick up again at verse 9, so we got a clean run through. Verse 9, and out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceedingly great towards the south, and towards the east, and towards the pleasant land, which is Jerusalem. Verse 10, and it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground and stamped upon them. When the Bible talks about stars being cast down to the ground, it reminds us of the devil, because the Bible says in Isaiah chapter 14 that he had cast some of the stars of heaven to the ground. It also talks about that in the book of Revelation. So this power is getting some help from somewhere else as well. Verse 11, yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host. The prince of the host is the Messiah. Prince of the host means captain of the host or captains of God's armies. And by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of the sanctuary was cast down. Verse 12. And a host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. Now this is thick. We got to sort of wade through this one just a little bit. The first point made here is that this is the birth of the Roman Empire. In verse 9 it says, out of one of them came a little horn, and that describes the little horn power which arose from one of the 4 divisions of Alexander's kingdom. This is the same little horn that we talked about in Daniel chapter 7, where we talked about this little horn power, the one that would think to change God's times and laws. The second point is, Daniel sees all the empires appear in identical order. Daniel interpreted a vision in Daniel chapter 2. He has his own vision in Daniel chapter 7, and Daniel chapter 8, and Daniel chapter 11. In each one of the visions, these are the order that the nations are discussed. Babylon comes first, Media-Persia comes second, Greece comes third, fourth comes pagan Rome, then pagan Rome is divided, and then papal Rome. In all of the prophecies that we will discuss, the order never changes when he's giving you an explanation. Some people have said that this power that is being described here was Antiochus Epiphanes. You may not have ever heard of him, but Antiochus Epiphanes was a Greek king, a Seleucid king, and he was the one who slayed a pig inside of the Jewish temple. Some people say that he was the little horn power. But because when we read the Bible, we know that this little horn is not Antiochus, because Jesus himself says that we were to look out for this little horn. Jesus himself in Matthew 24, verse 15, Christ tells us that we need to look out for the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. When Christ was alive, Rome was ruling, not Greece. So this little horn that we are to look out for could not have been Antiochus Epiphanes, because the Greek Empire had moved off the scene and Antiochus Epiphanes was dead at the time Christ made this statement in Matthew 24, verse 15. That'll become clear later on as we go through the Bible study, but I thought it was worth mentioning. When we look at verse 11, and it says, and by him, the little horn, the daily sacrifices were taken away. The daily sacrifices. In this phrase, it is not the sacrifices that were being taken away, but the daily. The word sacrifices does not appear in the original Hebrew text. It was added later to help clarify the meaning. The Hebrew word for daily is tamid, Tamid, which means something that occurs on a regular basis. The offering of the sacrifice took place regularly each day. If you look in the Bible in First Chronicles chapter 23, verses 30 and 31, it talks about the tamid, or the regular services. And this is what it reads in First Chronicles 23, 30 and 31. It says, to stand every morning to thank and praise the Lord, and likewise at the evening, and at every presentation of a burnt offering to the Lord on the Sabbaths, and on the new moons, and on the set feasts, by number according to the ordinance governing them regularly, which is tamid, before the Lord. So here we find the Hebrew word tamid is used for all the reoccurring worshiping services in the Old Testament, whether they came daily, weekly, monthly, or yearly. So this particular power, this little horn, was going to take away the worship of God. He was going to desolate it. One of the things that Rome was known for, that pagan Rome was known for, pagan Rome, when it would conquer a nation, would take that nation's gods and bring the image of the gods into the Roman pantheon. And it was a big structure in Rome where they would put the gods of the people they conquered inside, and they would begin to worship those gods. They did the same thing with the articles of worship that were in the temple in Jerusalem. Also, in AD 70, Rome invaded the city of Jerusalem. Rome pitched banners in honor of its pagan gods on the holy grounds of the temple, eventually setting the temple on fire and burning it to the ground. This resulted in the abomination of desolation. It literally ended the daily worship services to Elohim in the temple. This is one of the main ways that we know that Rome was established as the little horn of Daniel 8. We know from Daniel 2 and 7 and from history that the power which followed Greece was Rome. In chapters 2 and 7, it is shown in two phases, pagan Rome and the divided Rome. We saw in chapter 7 that the religious power of papal Rome rose to dominate the divided empire. This vision represents that power. The physical actions of pagan Rome against God's people are symbolic of the papal persecution of God's people and their true worship. When the papal Roman Empire came into being, it was a religious power, but it used the power of government to enforce its laws. The first king to empower the papacy was Emperor or King Clovis of France. King Clovis of France. He was the first nation of Europe to allow his armies to fight the wars for the papacy. Let's pick up at verse 13. Verse 13. Daniel chapter 8, verse 13. I know we got a lot of information, but trust me, we can handle it. Daniel 8:13. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot? And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Now we know that this prophetic period of 2,300 days equals 2,300 years. How do we know it's not a literal 2,300 days? Because 2,300 days equals a little bit more than 4 years. equals a little bit more, well, 4 to 6 years in time. And we know that the Greek Empire lasted way more than 6 years. So it could not be a literal 2,300 days. So if it's a prophetic 2,300 days, we know that it is 2,300 years. A day in Bible prophecy equals 1 literal year. So the 2,300 days allotted for the events in this vision are 2,300 years. We see the day for year principle in the Bible in Ezekiel chapter 4, verse 6, and Numbers chapter 14, verse 34. Write them down. Again, this time period could not be a literal 2,300 days, because that's a little bit over 6 years. And because this vision encompasses the Persian, Greek, Roman, and papal powers, and because verses 17 and 19 state that the vision extends to the end of time. You know, the Bible actually tells us when the end of time begins. It's in the Bible. The angel does not give the starting date in this chapter, but we will find it in chapter 9. When we get to chapter 9, the angel is literally going to give you the start date for the beginning of the end of time, right? There is a 2,300-day prophecy, which is talked about in Daniel 8:19. And for those of you who are watching on the internet, I put a little chart up there that you are welcome to take a picture of. It is a chart that we will talk about a lot when we get to Daniel chapter 9. So if you're able, take a picture of it. The 2,300 days starts in Ezra chapter 7, verses 127, when there is a decree to rebuild Jerusalem in 457 BC. That is the start date. That's when the gun goes off to start the 2,300 days of prophecy in Daniel 8:19. We'll run across this again when we get to Daniel chapter 9. Daniel chapter 9, we'll run across it again. We're also going to talk about the 70 weeks prophecy of Daniel 9:24. So this chart will come in handy. But I just want you to see that if we started in 457 BC, when the decree to rebuild Jerusalem was given in Ezra 7, verses 1 to 27, and you go forward 2,300 years, that brings you to 1844. 1844, which according to the Bible was the beginning of the end of time. Meaning that there were no more prophecies regarding these time periods that we can count. When he says end of time, it doesn't mean that the world is coming to an end in 1844. It just means that the end of the prophecy saying 2,300 years was coming to an end, right? You can count the end of the time prophecy at 1844. Earlier, there were religious people, when they studied the prophecies and they saw that it was the end of time, they thought it was the end of man's time and the end of the world. But the prophecy was simply saying the end of the time prophecy. It began in 457 BC. Add 2,300 years to it, it takes you to 1844. Okay? We'll see this again when we cover Daniel chapter 9 tomorrow. Let's pick up again with Daniel 8:15. Daniel 8:15. And when it came to pass, when I, even I, Daniel, had seen the vision and sought for the meaning, then behold, there stood before me as the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, which called and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand the vision. The man who is speaking is Christ. Yeshua is speaking to the angel Gabriel. He is standing on the banks of the Ulai River. Verse 17. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid, and I fell upon my face. But he said unto me, understand, O son of man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. At the time of the end, at the end of time, people will understand this vision. meaning at the end of time, which is 1844, people will begin to understand the visions and prophecies of Daniel. And that is exactly what happened. Daniel 8:18. Now, as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep on my face towards the ground. But he touched me and set me upright. And he said, behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation. For at that time appointed the end shall be. The ram which thou sawest, having two horns, are the kings of Media and Persia. This is the angel explaining to Daniel that the ram that he saw was the king of Media and Persia. Verse 21, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia or Greece. And the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. The first king of Greece was Alexander the Great. Verse 22, now that being broken, whereas four stood up for it, four kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his own power. So when the big horn, which is Alexander the Great, was destroyed, his kingdom continued to flourish. The Bible was making it clear that the kingdom of Greece wasn't just running on the power of Alexander the Great. There was another power behind the throne. These four kingdoms still continue to run, right? So who is the power that keeps urging these kingdoms along? There's a struggle between good and evil, between God and Satan. Satan is trying to use these empires to crush out God's people, and God uses these same empires to wake up his people and get them ready for his coming, right? He uses these empires to punish Jerusalem over and over again so that they can repent and confess and come back to him. Part of the reason that we being punished now as a people is because he is trying to wake us up and get us to repent and confess and come back to him, to follow his laws, his statutes, and his commandments. In Deuteronomy chapter 28, it says that we will be punished over and over again by nations, and each time it was designed to bring us back to the Father. The angel Gabriel is given a divine command to instruct Daniel so he will understand the vision. We don't have to guess what the vision was because the angel gave the breakdown. However, Daniel faints before Gabriel can give him the starting date for the 2300-day prophecy. Daniel later states that no one understood the vision. We pick up in Daniel 9 tomorrow, and the angel comes back to explain to Daniel what the vision meant in Daniel chapter 9. So if you want to read ahead now, go ahead. Spoiler alert, okay? Let's pick up at verse 23, Daniel 8:23. And it says, in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He shall destroy wonderfully and shall prosper and practice and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. Who are the mighty and the holy people? Those are the believers in the true God. Those who still believe in the law, statutes, and commandments of Elohim. Verse 25. And through his policy, also he shall cause craftiness, trickery to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes. Who's that? That's Yeshua, the Christ, the one who was crucified. He will stand up against him, but he shall be broken without hand. So this Roman power stands up against the literal prince of princes and crucifies him on a cross. But then afterward, pagan Rome continued to persecute the Christians, and after pagan Rome was done, papal Rome came in and continued to destroy the two believers. Let's take a minute and go over 23 to 25, Daniel 8, verses 23 to 25. It says, this power is broken without hand. This is the same expression alluding to the rock that was cut out of the mountain without a hand that destroyed the image that Nebuchadnezzar saw in vision in Daniel chapter 2. So who is cutting this rock without a human hand? Or who is the rock that is cut without a human hand? That's Christ, Yeshua. And also by a quick comparison of the fourth beast and its little horn from chapter 7 with the little horn of chapter 8, we see that they both represent the same power. So in Daniel chapter 7, the little horn did what? It made war with the saints, Daniel 7:21. It spoke, it had a mouth speaking great things, as Daniel 7:8. Daniel 7:19, it was exceedingly dreadful. And Daniel 7:11 said the beast was slain and given to the burning. When we go to Daniel 8 and we see the same little horn power, it tells you in Daniel 8:24, it was to destroy the mighty and holy people. Daniel 8:11 said he magnified himself. Daniel 8:23 said he was a king of fierce countenance, meaning that it was difficult, if not impossible, for other nations to stand up against him. Verse 25 says he is broken without hand. The reason it is important to notice that he is broken without hand, it means that no earthly power will destroy the papacy. No earthly power can destroy it. It would be destroyed when the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, returns. This power, represented here in Daniel 8 as the blending of pagan and papal Rome, has throughout the course of its history fulfilled the prophecies in this chapter. Let's hit verses 26 and 27. Daniel 8:26. And the vision of the evening and the morning, which was told, is true. Wherefore shut thou up the vision, for it shall be for many days. Verse 27. And I, Daniel, fainted and was sick certain days. Afterward, I rose up and did the king's business, and I was astonished at the vision, but none understood it. When we get to Daniel chapter 9, and Daniel starts his new vision, the angel comes back and he starts to explain to him some things that Daniel still was being troubled about. The next vision that Daniel has in Daniel chapter 9 is 12 years later. 12 years between the time he has this one and the next one. In Daniel 8:26 and 27, the angel explained all the parts of the vision except the 2300 days, the evenings and the mornings, and the cleansing of the sanctuary. Where the interpretation for these parts of the vision would be expected, Daniel is instead told to close up the vision. Now, some people have taken that to mean that the visions were supposed to be closed forever, but that's not what the Bible says. In fact, the angel comes back in Daniel chapter 9 and begins to explain it. And also when we get to the book of Revelation, Daniel picks up, John the Revelator picks up and begins to reveal, make known some of the things that were unable to be understood during the time of Daniel and his initial vision. That's why Daniel and Revelation go together. Listen, we're going to end for today. We'll pick up tomorrow with Daniel chapter 9. And in Daniel chapter 9, again, the angel will bring more clarity. You've got to read this Bible. There is no part of the Bible, anything that you have read from Genesis to Revelation, that is a private interpretation. God has done a miraculous thing. Elohim has done a miraculous thing that every part of the Bible is explained in some form or fashion in another part of the Bible. So anytime somebody talks to you about anything in the Bible, do some Bible research, Google, right? And you can You can look up the same verses and same phrases, and you will find that there will be multiple verses that always makes it clear. The Bible says line upon line, precept upon precept. Here a little, there a little. And that's how the Bible becomes clear to us. Okay. With that being said, everybody who's online today, I thank you for joining us. You are welcome to call in on the phone line. I'll be on the phone line for at least another 10 or 15 minutes. So you're welcome to call in. People are already on the phone line. If you have a comment or a question or something you want to add or get clarity on, or just whatever it may be, feel free to call in. Let me give you the number. The number is 712-432-0075. 712-432-0075. The PIN code is 745954 #. 745954 #. We are on our 8th day of the 31 days of transformation. Tomorrow will be our 9th day, and we'll pick up on Daniel 9. When we're done with Daniel, we'll be on the Revelation. Be a good Bible student and read ahead. Read ahead. Be prepared for tomorrow. Meet me back here. I look forward to seeing each of you at the gates of the kingdom. For what would it profit us to gain the whole world and to lose our own soul? Until I meet you and greet you, walk with the King today and be a blessing. Today's Bible study is officially over, at least online. Take care, guys. Elohim bless.